Hey guys, in this video we're going to take a look at how to virtualize Fedora. We're going to download the Fedora 27 desktop workstation environment and get that set up on VirtualBox. So let's go ahead and just jump right into it. So here you can see that we're at getfedora.org. We've got three different options here as far as what we want to download, or what we can download rather. We've got the workstation environment. This is the one we're going to use. There's also a server environment. We're not going to touch that one right now. And then there's also the atomic. We're not going to touch that one either. We are going to go with the workstation here. So if I go ahead and click here, we've got some different options. Basically, what we want to look at over here is on the right-hand side. And basically, we've got a 64-bit and a 32-bit. I work exclusively with 64-bit operating systems as long as there's one available. So I'm going to go ahead and click on that. Of course, then it's going to come over to here. It's going to start downloading automatically. I've already got this, so I'm going to cancel it. I don't want to waste the server bandwidth here. Of course, you will want to go ahead and let this complete if you don't already have a copy of Fedora. So I'm going to go ahead and close that out. I will also, if you're wondering why would I use Fedora, why would I want to look at it, that kind of thing, I will put some links in the description down below where you can check out some really good reasons as far as why people suggest using Fedora. It's super easy to use, and it's this great blend of like cutting edge, newest versions of all of the stuff that's being released while still being very, very stable because of the people behind it. So, like I said, I'll have some links in the description down below where you can go check that stuff out. I'm going to go ahead and close, actually, well, all of this, and then come down here to VirtualBox. I'm going to click New. I'm going to type in Fedora right here, and what's really cool is that VirtualBox is smart enough to automatically fill this other stuff in for us. Now, if we get to this screen and again you're sure that you've got a 64-bit operating system and a 64-bit computer and you only see the Fedora 32, stop. It means you don't have virtualization enabled on your BIOS. I made a video about it. I'll link to it up here with a little card or whatever. Go look at that. Go watch that video. It's like 3 minutes long, and it will explain why you're not seeing the 64-bit version. It'll also explain why you're going to get some of the errors that may pop up, talking about virtualization errors and things like that. Go watch that video again up here in the cards. And like I said, it's about a 3-minute video. Go watch that, get virtualization enabled, and then come back to this video. So next steps, just click next. I want to give this 4 gigs of memory. I've got 16 available, so I'm going to give it 4. I'm pretty comfortable giving it 4. We'll click next. We are going to create the hard disk right now. That's fine. We're going to use a VDI or virtual disk image here. That's pretty standard here. Going to click next. Dynamically allocated versus fixed size. Fixed size just says whatever amount of storage space you give this operating system, I'm just going to knock that out of your hard drive. You don't get access to that with anything else, which is fine if that's what you want to do. But if I give it 20 gigs and I don't need all that 20 gigs, let's let something else use some of that hard drive space if needed. So we're going to use dynamically allocated. This just says it can use up to 20 gigs of available hard drive space. So we're going to say next. Again, like I said, 20. I like to give these 20. But what I also want to do here is actually come into, like by default, this is going to store on your C drive. I've got an SSD that's like 250 gigs. Not a lot of space really, and I don't want my virtual boxes to take up all of that space. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to move it to a different hard drive, which I recommend doing. I've got like this 3 terabyte drive here. I think it's 3 terabyte, 4 terabyte, something. But I've got this folder right there. I'm going to come into here and create a new folder, and I'm going to call it Fedora. I'm going to open that up, and I'm going to save it right in there. And this is going to make sure that I'm not going to kill my SSD by taking up too much hard drive space. So I'm going to click Create, and then we're going to right-click it, go to Settings, and then we'll go through some of these. Don't really need to go through all of them, but there's a few of them that we will want to go through. The General tab, usually fine, not a lot to change in here. System, again, this is where we set our memory at 4 gigs. That's fine. processor, I want to bump this up. Instead of giving it 1 processing core, I'm going to give it 2. You can give it as many as you have available. I don't suggest giving it all of your cores, because then your system will start stuttering and lagging, and it'll just be a pain. So I just like to give it a couple of cores. I've never had an issue with it there. If you go to acceleration, this should be fine. Make sure that these are enabled. Again, if you don't have virtualization enabled on your BIOS, go do that. Just stop what you're doing here and go do that first, and then come back and watch this video. Next thing is the display tab. I'm going to give it 128 megs because that's all you can give it. If you wanted to give yourself a multi-monitor setup, you could do that. I've got 2 monitors, so I could change that, but you guys wouldn't be able to see it. So I'm going to go with 1 monitor. I'm not going to worry about remote or just remote display or video capture. We're doing that through OBS. Not going to worry about any of that. Next tab is storage. We're going to go ahead and add a new drive here. We're going to go ahead and say choose disk, and I'm going to go ahead and select my Fedora ISO. Really nothing else to do in here. Audio, this is all fine. Network, if you want to enable or disable network connectivity in your virtual machine, you can do that here by turning this on and off. I want it on, so we'll just make sure that's checked and that NAT is selected there. And none of this other stuff matters. If you wanted to share a USB device, whether it's like a USB drive, an external hard drive, whatever, you could come in here and add that to the list of devices here. But if you share a hard drive, for instance, like a USB thumb drive in here, it can only be available in the Linux or in Windows. It can only be available in one or the other at a time. So that's something to keep in mind. You can't have one drive available in both operating systems at the same time. So just something to keep in mind there. I'm going to go and click OK. And I'm just going to come down here and click Start. And a normal start is fine. And we'll just give this a couple of minutes to get going here. Really, it shouldn't take that long. I want to just go ahead and install. You could do just kind of a live boot and check it out, but that's not what we're here for. So I'm going to go ahead and say install. And this may take it a minute to actually get into what we want to see. There we go. So now it's doing what it needs to do. Okay, so this is all good. Starting the installer, that's important. Let's drag that up a little bit. Cool, so now it's saying welcome to Fedora 27. It's asking us what languages we want to use. I want to just use English from the United States, and we'll click continue. And so now basically we're just going to hang out and wait. It's going to go through all of its startup stuff here, and there's really not much we can do other than just wait. Right now it's downloading some information, and depending on your internet speed, this will be affected by that. So hopefully you've got a fast internet connection. If not, I'm sorry for you. Cool. So that's most of it. And the next thing we want to do is actually click on where it says installation destination here. We're going to click that and make sure that it is on that hard drive that we wanted, and we'll click done. Saving storage configuration. Cool. That's all we've got to do. So now we're going to go ahead and click begin installation. So it's actually doing some stuff down here. It's creating all of our files and folders and doing everything that it needs to do. But while it's doing that, we've got some work to do as well. For the sake of security, you want to make sure that you give the system a root password. Anytime you set up an operating system and you don't give it a root password, you're leaving yourself open for all kinds of security issues. So we're going to go ahead and click there. And that's good. So I'm going to go ahead and give it a password, and give a password, and we're going to go ahead and say done. So that's step one. The other thing to keep in mind here is that a sysadmin, an experienced sysadmin or system administrator will tell you never use the root account if you don't have to. So what we want to do next is actually create a user that will also be an administrator. So I'm going to say db tech username. Cool, that works for me. We want to make sure that this is a user administrator. That's what we want. That way they can have all of the same privileges as root, mostly, without having access to the root account. So next thing we want to do, again, for security purposes here, we want to make sure, yep, that's good. Okay, so we've got our name, our username. We've added it as administrator. We want to make sure that it's got a password. We've given it a password. The next button down here says advanced. This is where you could go in and set the home directory and specify the user ID, or specify the user ID and the group ID manually. Let Linux, Fedora in this case, handle all of that. I'm just going to click cancel, and I'm going to click done. So now we just kind of sit and wait. There's really not a lot else we can do at this point. It is going through the process of downloading all of the files and stuff that it needs. Again, if you've got a slow internet connection, this will take longer. Luckily, I've got a pretty quick internet connection, so this will go pretty quickly. We're already halfway done of the 1.32 gigs. We're at like 53%, 54% there. Once that's done downloading, of course, then it's got to go through the installation and configuration process of all of this stuff. So there's really nothing else we can do except for hang out. Luckily for you guys, at least for the sake of this video, at this point I can speed all of this up to be only a few seconds long, and then you can jump back in when your system has completed all of these updates. Okay, so now we've got all of the downloading done. And that's good. That usually doesn't take too long. It is just a little over a gig. So again, of course, your internet speeds will determine how long that takes. And then, of course, now it's got to go through the process of installing everything. In this case, I've got like almost 1,500 things to install and configure. This will take a little while. Part of that will be dependent upon your host system and how much the resources of that you could allocate to the guest system in this case. And so hopefully you can give it a couple of processing cores, a few gigs of RAM, and hopefully this should go fairly quickly for you. But while this is running, I need more coffee. Okay, so we're almost halfway done with the install process. Okay, so now it's done all the installation. Wow. Okay, so now it's done all of the installation stuff. Now it's going to go through and do some configuring. This part shouldn't take too long, really. So we'll just go ahead and let it do what it's going to continue to do. So this kernel core that it's installing right now usually takes the longest of all of the configuring to do. The kernel is kind of the base of the operating system, so we want to make sure that that's configured correctly. Bootloader, that means we're almost done. Just a little bit of cleanup, and should be done here in the next few seconds, really. Okay, so that means everything here is done. One thing we will want to do here real quick is come over and right click and go to settings, go to storage, and we actually want to remove, we can't remove it. Okay, so we're going to click reboot. And now let's see. Nope, still can't do it. So this is a little frustrating, but it's not a big deal. We're gonna go ahead and click File, Close, just power it off. Doesn't matter. That's weird. Okay, so we're gonna right click and we're gonna say Remove Attachment. We're gonna click OK, and then go ahead and power it back up. If we don't remove that ISO or that image file, what the hell? Powered off. Why? Weird. Remove. Okay. Let me check that again to make sure that it actually removed it. Okay, it did. There we go. Let's try this again. Cool. So here we're presented with a screen. It would have automatically just booted into the workstation, and that's fine. But you've also got an option here for rescue. This is going to be kind of like your safe mode, where it'll only boot up what it needs to, so you can go in and fix stuff. But again, brand new install, so we're just going to let it boot, just the standard Fedora Workstation Edition there. And we'll go ahead and make it full screen. Now this first boot, just like any other first boot, will take a little bit longer than normal. Again, it shouldn't take very long in the grand scheme of things, but it will take a little bit longer than normal. So there's our Fedora logo. So we'll give this just another second. And then it should give us a login screen with our username. Cool. So our password and click sign in. So again, if you noticed, if you watched my Kali Linux video, you'll remember that it was just by default it was just this little square about this big, right in the middle, and that was it. Here, luckily, we didn't have to do anything crazy to get full screen to work. So here it's just going to say, are you sure you want to use this default language? I'm going to say, yep, I sure am. If you wanted to switch to Dvorak or whatever, you could switch to there, but I'm not going to. Location services, privacy, you can change your privacy settings here for location services and problem reporting and things like that. Those are at your discretion. I'm just going to leave them on. If you wanted to connect to any of your online accounts here, you can do that. This is very reminiscent of Android. You know, when you set up an Android phone, it'll ask if you want to connect to Facebook and Google and all of that stuff. I'm not going to worry about that at the moment. Yeah, I'm just going to say start using Fedora. Give it a second. And this getting started screen will pop up. And it kind of walks you through things like how to change the wallpaper and using system search and going online, things like that. All pretty standard stuff. If you're not familiar with Fedora or Linux desktops in general, this is definitely some good information to go look through. We're going to go ahead and close that for right now, though. First thing I always like to do, of course, is come up to Devices and insert the Guest Edition CD image. Just make sure that we get the best compatibility for virtualizing our operating system here. So I'm going to go ahead and say, yep, we're going to go ahead and run that. Again, wants our password. And so now it's going to think about it for a minute here. It's going to run through some install stuff. And then once that's done, we're just going to do a quick reboot and jump back into the desktop. Cool, so that's easy enough. So for me, I like to do it this way. You'll notice that the desktop here, oops, come on, is pretty sparse, not a lot on here. I dig that they've done that because I like a clean desktop. Like even when I'm not virtualizing and making these videos, you can see my desktop is pretty clean. like just nothing on it. That's just the way I like to be. So I like that by default, that's how Fedora is. If you want to access your stuff, you just click activities. Then you've got access to your Firefox and mail and music and all that stuff. So I'm going to come up here. I'm going to type in terminal. I'm going to go ahead and run that, and I'm just going to. Oops! Wow! I'm going to type really poorly. Reboot. And that's all we're going to do. Anytime you do the guest editions installation CD, I always do a reboot right after to make sure that everything is loaded in there properly. Not always necessary, but I always do it just because. Again, we'll go to this loading screen. You'll notice that it's going considerably faster this time, so that's good. And then, of course, once this loads, it'll go to our login screen where we'll have to enter our password again. Something to note here, like when I enter my passwords, when I have to use numbers and that kind of thing, I use the keypad over on the right-hand side of the keyboard. And by default, it keeps kicking the number pad off. So that's something to keep in mind. You will want to make sure you hit that numlock. Make sure numlock is enabled. If you also use numbers and the keypad and that sort of thing. So here we are back at our desktop, ready to go. Of course, again, the first thing I always like to do after doing the guest installation or the guest edition CD is open up the terminal. And here I'm going to deliberately mess something up to show you the difference here versus some of the other other Linux distributions that are out there. I'm going to do a sudo apt-get update. And the reason I'm doing this is I'll show you. And I dig that they've done this by using sudo. They're assuming that you know what sudo is and that all of the responsibility that comes with it. And I like that they put that in there. Again, put in your password. And it says apt-get command not found. And that is because Fedora doesn't use apt-get. It uses something called yum. So we're going to do sudo. Oops, wow, I actually managed to get that right. Come on. Yum, sudo yum update. And now it's going to think for a minute and let us know basically that all of the updates are already done. Because it did all of that when it was doing its initial installation. That isn't always the case, so I always like to run my updates and my upgrades first thing. So we'll go ahead and let this run. It's going to tell us that everything is good to go, but periodically you may want to run a sudo yum update, and then once that updates, then you can do a sudo yum upgrade and make sure that you've got the most current version of the operating system. But it's just something that I always like to do at the very beginning to make sure that I haven't missed anything. Cool, nothing to do. So again, if I do an upgrade and hit enter, same thing, it's all good to go. So then in that case, let's do a couple of other little things here. We should be connected. That update and it checking online, all that kind of stuff, should have let us know that we are connected to the internet. But just to make sure, we are going to go ahead and come into here. And all of this seems to be loading just fine. But I'm going to go to fast.com just to make sure that we've got a good connection. Yeah, I'm pretty happy with that. So we're not really losing anything between the host operating system and the guest operating system. So I'm really stoked about that, which also tells us that we are in fact connected to the internet. Now that we know that we've got that, let's come up to the top right-hand side of the screen where we've got some of these icons at the top, and we're going to click this little down arrow, and then we're going to click on the gear or the screwdriver and wrench button here for settings. And here is if you had Wi-Fi, let's say you're doing this on a laptop, or you've got a Wi-Fi adapter on your PC, you can toggle those settings here. Same with Bluetooth. Background, if you wanted to change your desktop background or your lock screen background, you can do that here. Notifications, you can say what notifications you want to get. and how you want to get them, whether it's pop-ups or locks on the lock screen or whatever. And you can, of course, change what notifications you get by coming into each of these and turning them on and off as you see fit. Search. Where do you want to search? Earlier I clicked on settings, and this is where I typed in like terminal or whatever. You can go in here and tell it, where. Oops. Really? That was dumb. Let's go back into that. There we go. You can tell it what things you want it to be able to search in. You can just leave this default, or you can say, what, I don't want it to search the calculator. Don't know why it would, but you could, I suppose. Region and language, again, this is where you're going to set your language and your format, things like that. Your input sources, you can add additional input sources. I dig that. I don't ever do this because I only speak English, unfortunately, but you could add additional languages if you wanted to. Universal access, this is going to be for your visually impaired users, where you can set things like high contrast, which isn't great for me. I don't like the way that looks, but again, for the visually impaired, really like that they've got all of these different things like screen readers and sound keys and visual alerts. You can turn all this stuff on to really make it much easier to use. Again, online accounts, there's actually some more in here that weren't there at the beginning, and there's even more after that. Privacy, you can change your privacy settings here to like automatically purge your trash, your temporary files, allow usage history, things like that. You can turn all this on and off depending on what your level of comfort is. Sharing, if you want to change your computer name, you could do that. File sharing, all that stuff is in here as well. Sound, if you plan on playing music and movies and that kind of stuff in here, you will want to probably crank up your output volume. Otherwise, you got to change your main system volume, and it just becomes a wreck switching back and forth between the two. So just turn up your system volume inside Linux. You'll be much happier if you do that. Power settings, you can change those. Network settings, we've got our gig connection there. Devices, again, printers, keyboards, mice, displays, things like that. All your settings for those are in there. Oh gosh, what else? And then details, just details about your system, date and time, users, things like that. All of that is in here. So I think that's it for this video. The installation process here, like you saw, is really, really easy. Just make sure that, again, if you've got a 64-bit operating system and computer and whatnot, but you're not getting that option at the install at the very beginning, go check your BIOS settings, make sure you've got virtualization enabled. If you start getting errors along the way saying there's things going wrong, make sure you've got virtualization enabled. Those are, after doing a few of these videos and having lots and lots of people message me, virtualization not being enabled is probably your culprit. It's been the case like 99% of the time with anybody that I've helped. Just make sure you've got virtualization enabled. I will have a card up here where I did a video about enabling virtualization on your motherboard. Unfortunately, each motherboard is different in the way that you get to it, so you will have to consult your user's manual. But go check out that video. It's like 3 minutes. It's not a big deal. But I think I'm going to go ahead and wrap up this video here. We'll probably come back to this and check out some of the other features of Fedora at some point. But for now, I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up. If you want to support the channel, I'd really appreciate it. There are links to things like my Patreon and that kind of stuff down below, as well as my social media. If you don't want to be a patron, cool, I get it. But you could also, I'll have a link down there for my Amazon affiliate link, so that anytime you buy something on Amazon, I get a kickback. Doesn't cost you anything, doesn't change your shopping habits at all. Just click the link, I become your affiliate, and any purchases you make, I get credit for without knowing what you purchased. So so that's definitely an option as well. If you found the video helpful, informative, and you have that good junk, hit the thumbs up button. Helps me and the channel out a ton. So if you could do that, it just takes a second and would really, really mean a lot to me and the channel. if the channel was a sentient being, but you understand what I'm saying here. Also, I've got lots of new videos like this coming out for more virtualization, more software, more stuff like this. Like I said in one of my last videos, I'm going to be kind of giving the product reviews a bit of a break. I've got a couple more coming in probably over the next few weeks or whatever from companies that I've agreed to work with. But for the most part, we're going to take a break from the product reviews, do more of this kind of stuff. I really enjoy this stuff. You guys really seem to enjoy this stuff. So we're going to do this for a while and just let the products take a back seat for a bit. So again, I really appreciate your support in watching my videos. So again, thanks for your time, and I'll talk to you in the next one.